In 1766, Nottingham, here in the UK, found itself at the centre of a rather unusual riot over cheese. Yes, you heard that right. It sounds wild, it sounds crazy, but to be honest, there are a few things in life I would riot over. Cheese would be one of them. As a cheese connoisseur, try and take away my cheese and see what happens. I will riot. And as a cheese connoisseur, I have a top tip for all of you. My favourite cheese in the world is the Snowdonia Black Bomber and extra mature cheddar that I think about on a daily basis. All of you do me a favour and comment your favourite cheese down below as well. I need inspiration for my next cheese board. Talk to me about cheese, please. But I digress. The infamous Nottingham Cheese Riots weren't just about people being upset over the cost of cheese and dairy. Beneath the surface, of course, there was a lot more going on. There were food shortages, rising prices, and growing frustration among ordinary people who were struggling to afford basic necessities. And when these tensions finally boiled over, what started as just frustration at the market quickly spiraled into absolute chaos. Whilst it may sound strange today, the cheese riots reveal a lot about the social and economic pressures at the time in 1766. So today we're going to explore how a simple commodity like cheese could spark such a dramatic event and what it tells us about life in 18th century Britain. But first, in keeping with our foodie theme today, I want to take a moment to thank HelloFresh for sponsoring. And we are back with my favourite, HelloFresh. Guys, you do not understand how much I need HelloFresh today. My wife has broken her collarbone. She can do nothing. It's a journey, so having fresh meals delivered to my front door is exactly what I need today. There has never been a day that I've needed a HelloFresh delivery more. Help me. I have no memory of what I've ordered, so let's open this box and find out. They've got these fun new boxes. So HelloFresh is a recipe kit that gets delivered to your front door as often as you need it. So you can get it every week, every other week, once a month. It is completely customizable to what suits you and your lifestyle and your family. And every week there are 35 recipes to choose from. And I have made some incredible HelloFresh meals in the past. I just love it. We all know how much I love HelloFresh at this point. So this week my meal options are oregano crumb chicken and lemon butter sauce. That sounds amazing. We have the 21-day aged sirloin steak and cheesy rosemary chips, or the double cheese charred corn quesadillas. Oh my god, I was so excited about these. These look so freaking good. I have just realised I probably need to choose the meal that's most friendly to eat with one hand. Maybe the quesadillas. I don't know. I'll ask my wife. There are many reasons why I love HelloFresh as much as I do. One of the main things is budgeting. I am terrible. I literally go to the supermarket and I spend so much money on ingredients I'm never going to use because, as I always say, me and my wife, we're just here, there and everywhere all the time. I go to the supermarket and I buy meals and I just don't cook it because we get invited out for dinner and I'm like, oh well, I'd rather go out for dinner, obviously. So I end up throwing away so many rotten vegetables, but with HelloFresh, I don't have that issue. We get 3 meals every single week. And we're always home for at least 3 nights a week. This week, we're going to be home every day. Every single day this week. It just makes budgeting really easy because I know exactly what I'm getting, when I'm getting it. I know what meals I'm eating each week. It just takes away so much of adult life stress. And there's a lot of stress in adult life. And why not minimise it where you can? Get fresh, high quality ingredients with every single meal. They come in these pre-packaged bags, so you just stick these in your fridge and that's it. And the clocks went back last night. I forgot, hence why it's actually getting dark as I'm filming this because I am the worst. Biscuit, do you mind? But I am so excited for all of the long, cosy, dark winter nights ahead. I love cooking in the winter and I love winter. Is that really weird? I know some people get really depressed in the season, but it's where I thrive. I make so much good food. Biscuit. HelloFresh just offers convenient, delicious meals that you can share with your family and friends, and that's all you can ask for, really. So if you want to try out HelloFresh for yourself, and I highly recommend that you do, you can use my code BACKWITHGEORGIA for 60% off your first box, and then 20% off for 2 whole months. That's 20% off for 2 months, and free desserts for life. And the desserts are usually goo puddings. Just saying. You can also use my QR code, which will be on screen somewhere. Right here, right now. You can scan it with your phone and that'll get you the discount too. Oh, speaking of the Goo puddings, this is what we've got. The Goo cookies and cream cheesecake. So let's begin with a little bit of my favourite thing in these history videos, context. In the years leading up to 1766, Britain was dealing with some pretty significant economic challenges, largely driven by poor harvests and rising inflation. In recent years, agricultural output had been very unstable. There had been multiple seasons of bad weather, meaning that there were low grain yields. And grain was a staple of the British diet at this time, mostly in the form of bread. A shortage of grain meant that the price of bread increased, and this had a direct impact on food security. In a society where people didn't have reliable access to food, people began to panic. It became this underlying unrest that was constantly just bubbling under the surface. It was a constant anxiety, and eventually, in any situation like this, people became desperate. And with these grain prices soaring came a ripple effect, causing agricultural shortages and rising production costs. Livestock, such as cows, relied very heavily on grain alongside other crops for their food, especially during the winter months when grazing is limited. So as the grain prices soared, so did the cost of feeding livestock, making dairy farming much more expensive. Farmers are then forced to pass these higher costs onto consumers, and therefore all dairy products, milk, butter, cheese became much more expensive. And don't even get me started on meat, like meat was insanely expensive. Alongside this, you've got the fact that when people can't afford bread, demand for the other relatively affordable foods like cheese also surge. It's a classic case of supply and demand further driving up prices. The overall scarcity of affordable food in this time created a situation where even essential items like cheese became luxury goods for many people. Bread and cheese were staples. They couldn't be luxury. It's what people lived on, but now they were priced out of both. And as a quick side note, even in the modern day, one of the biggest surprises of adulthood for me was the price of cheese. Like, what do you mean a nice block of mature cheddar is now £4? Like, I will get through that in 5 days. £4. It's insane, and that's just standard cheap brand. Of course, this rise in prices didn't affect everyone in Britain, mostly just the working class families who were already struggling to make ends meet. And inflation compounded these problems as wages failed to keep pace with the rising cost of living. The working poor, who spent the majority of their income on food, were hit the hardest, and at the same time, wealth inequality was growing, with merchants and landowners benefiting from high prices, whilst ordinary people faced growing hardship. And all of this does seem eerily similar to today's situation, doesn't it? Cost of living crisis, wages not keeping up with the cost of living, nothing's changed. In the 18th century, this created a very tense social atmosphere where economic pressures were building and the public's patience was wearing thin. And markets like Nottingham's Goose Fair became flashpoints for this frustration, as people felt very exploited by the merchants who were seen as profiting from the scarcity and the hunger. The Nottingham Goose Fair is one of the oldest and most famous fairs in England, going back 700 years. The first mention in official records is 1284, with the fair beginning as a livestock and trade event originally centred around the sale of geese, which were driven in their hordes from the surrounding areas. The fair always took place in early October, coinciding with Michaelmas, or coinciding a few days after Michaelmas, which is celebrated on the 29th September every single year. In this time, there were traditionally 4 quarter days in a year, so a day every 3 months in which servants were hired, rents were due, leases began, and it was said that harvest would have to be completed by Michaelmas, hence why the Goose Fair would happen a few days after Michaelmas every year, because the harvest would be done and everything would be ready to be sold. By the late Middle Ages, the Goose Fair had grown into this major event, traders coming from across the whole country to attend it, selling not just geese by this time, but a wide range of goods, textiles, foodstuffs, crafts, but the name Goose Fair stuck. The fair was huge every single year. There were countless traders and buyers. All the local people would attend the fair to stock up on food and just general goods for the long winter ahead. It was a really important day for the local people in Nottingham. If they missed out on these deals at the fair, they would really struggle that winter. So by the 18th century, the fair had become a central part of Nottingham's economic and social calendar. And one of the best things you could buy at this fair was cheese, and lots of it. Again, stocking up for the winter. I know we've already touched on it a little bit, but let's explore a bit more about why cheese in particular was important. Like, why was cheese the catalyst here? So, for many in this time, cheese served as an affordable, nutritious source of protein, making it a key staple when meat was often too expensive for poorer families. Cheese was also practical. It was easy to store, transport, and preserve for longer periods compared to other food items, making it ideal for workers in rural communities with limited access to fresh produce. So, yeah, cheese was important, and it wasn't only this dietary necessity, but also a traded good at markets and fairs like the Nottingham Goose Fair, where it could be bought in bulk for household use or for resale by merchants. Given its importance in everyday life, any fluctuation in the price of cheese was felt very keenly by the population. When cheese prices rose in tandem with other foodstuffs, it sparked public outrage, highlighting how critical this very seemingly simple food was to both subsistence and economic stability at this time. So, when people turned up to the Goose Fair on the 2nd of October 1766 and saw the price of cheese, there was outrage and frustration. The public began to accuse merchants of price gouging and hoarding, practices that were seen as exploitative during a time of economic hardship. Many people believe that traders were deliberately withholding stock to artificially drive up prices, taking advantage of the already desperate situation. And this fueled resentment, with the people feeling that they were being cheated by the wealthy merchants who profited whilst ordinary families struggled to put food on the table. What might have seemed like a very minor issue, cheese prices, became a symbol of this broader economic injustice in the minds of these people who just wanted to stock up on their cheese for the winter. Discontent had been brewing for a while, and now it was boiling over. The government never did anything, the citizens felt abandoned by a political system that favoured the wealthy elite. The government completely failed to address the food security issues or implement any measures to regulate prices. Instead of taking proactive steps to protect consumers, the authorities always sided with the merchants. The combination of rising food costs, perceived merchant greed, and the population's growing discontent acted as the tipping point, turning the marketplace into a battleground. What started as protests over cheese prices quickly escalated into rioting and looting, as pent-up frustrations over these conditions finally boiled over into violence. This was an angry mob of fairgoers made up of frustrated locals and rural workers protesting these inflated prices. The situation escalated quite quickly when protesters started seizing cheese from the stalls and rolling large wheels of it through the streets of Nottingham. For any Nottingham locals who want more of a visual here, apparently they rolled massive wheels of this cheese down the hill at Peck Lane. As things got wilder, the crowds took advantage and started looting the cheese merchants' backstock as well. As word spread, the streets were soon filled with hundreds of rioters, overturning stalls and taking cheese by force, literally ripping it out of the hands of traders. Local authorities, including the mayor of Nottingham himself, did attempt to quell this chaos. He physically tried to intervene to stop people, but reports say that he was knocked down as people threw cheese at him, or some other sources say he was knocked down by a rolling wheel of cheese, which isn't funny, but is also definitely a little bit funny. As the violence continued to spread across the city, warehouses and shops were raided and the unrest continued for hours. The authorities just couldn't restore order for a really long time. One warehouse owner, who was furious at his cheese being taken, organised a mounted posse to track down his cheese, which had been taken to Castle Donington, about 11 miles away, which is quite an impressive feat in a time before cars. The local magistrate at the time refused to sign any search warrants for the houses in the village, so the posse instead detained several people on the streets on suspicion of rioting and beat them at the gates of said magistrate's house. But that didn't work. The posse was eventually driven away by a mob of women and children throwing stones. Like, this was an entire city, the poor versus the rich. And the poor, they were done. They had had enough. They were going to throw stones if they needed to throw stones. They didn't care if it got them in trouble because they were starving. Eventually, the authorities did manage to regain control with the help of the military, but by that point, the town had already suffered quite significant damage, both physical and social. One man did die after shots were fired by the militia into a crowd, and that man was William Eggleston. He was a farmer standing near a pile of cheese. But it would turn out that that was his own cheese, he was protecting his wares, and he wasn't a looter, and he died anyway. The riot continued overnight and over the next few days until the military did restore order. All of this whole riot was a sign that residents were no longer willing to accept these rising prices. So what do you think the authorities, the higher-ups, did? Did they put things in place to try and relieve this pressure? Of course not. Instead, they just arrested several people and put harsh punishments in place to discourage further rebellion. Just keep the sad, hungry people down. One local newspaper, the Leicester and Nottingham Journal, even accused the rioters of having caused a cheese shortage in the city, and it wasn't thought of as any deeper than that. It was the rioters' fault, and it didn't go any higher up, like it just ended there. The authorities did make an example of multiple people who had taken part in the looting and vandalism, and the local magistrates did issue stern warnings. I do wish I had more details about the exact punishments that were doled out here and what these warnings entailed, but alas, I do not. All I know is that these punishments were quite heavy-handed, and they did quell the dissent in the short term, but it left this sort of like lingering sense of resentment. And this wasn't the only food riot in England at this time. There were plenty of riots happening all over the country, mostly in Devon and Cornwall, but also in Gloucester, Bristol, Derby, Birmingham and Norwich. The South East, which had a much higher concentration of the wealthy elite, was largely peaceful, which is not a coincidence. All in all, the riots didn't help anything, and the issue just remained unresolved. All the riots did at the Goose Fair was reveal this growing disconnect between the ruling elite and the working class citizens, and they contributed to this growing dialogue, a dialogue that is still very prevalent in today's society. I wish I could provide you with a very well-rounded outro here, positive, uplifting, all these things changed and the people lived happily ever after kind of outro, but that's not what I have. That rarely happens. Nothing happened in the aftermath of this. The working class people were just trod further down. As far as I could find, the price of cheese just didn't change. The government didn't care. The Nottingham Goose Fair does still run today, but it does look a little bit different from 1766. Nowadays, it's a fun fair with more than 350 different rides and attractions, and the Visit Nottinghamshire website says it has thrills aplenty for all ages. If any of you have ever been to the Goose Fair, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Are there any cheese stands there? I feel like there would have to be cheese stands at the Nottingham Goose Fair, surely. Let me know. And that is all I have for you today on the subject of the Nottingham Cheese Riots. It is really quite eerie how this is from 1766 and things have not changed at all. Like, I could have been talking about something that happened a week ago and it would still make a lot of sense with today's political, social, economic situation. It's ridiculous. Just keep making the rich richer and let the poor people pay for it. Why not? Let's keep doing that. It really seems to be working. I mean, it has worked for hundreds of centuries, so why are they going to change it? Eh? Of course, a huge thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video today. As I always say, I would not be able to keep making this content without the support of my sponsors, and we all know how much I love HelloFresh. So if you want to check them out for yourself, you can use my code BACKWITHGeorgia, or you can use the QR code that'll be on screen somewhere right now. I love HelloFresh. I think it is such a genius idea, and I honestly sometimes wonder how I'd cope without it, which maybe is something I need to look at in myself, but it really helps me out. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.